paranormal can be a very confusing and sometimes insidious place, and that's before we even get to the ghosts, spirits, or even possibly demons. But sorry, we don't use the D word around here. Throughout time, the paranormal field has been marred with scandal, fakery, and charlatans trying to make a quick buck, with any legitimate, non-sensational research into the paranormal being seen as very boring. In this video, I'll discuss the historical issues with the paranormal, some of its most infamous characters, the current paranormal field, and some glimmers of hope for the future. My name's Mike, and if you've got your K2 at the ready, let's go find some ghosts. Chapter 1. Historical Issues. Paranormal, or more specifically the belief in ghosts, has existed for almost all of human history, with some of the earliest mentions of ghosts happening in ancient Greek texts, such as a haunted house in Athens where its occupants would be haunted by a chain-clanking ghost. They followed the ghost out into the courtyard of the building where the phantom vanished. Upon digging up where the spirit had vanished, a skeleton bound in chains was revealed, and the haunting ceased from this point onwards. And while there are various mentions of ghosts and hauntings throughout history, it wasn't until the Victorian period where paranormal mania really took hold. The Victorians seemed to be obsessed with their own mortality and would partake in various different methods to contact the dead. This would lead some Victorians to have their own seance rooms, and it wasn't uncommon to pop into this room after some dinner and drinks to try and evoke the spirits of deceased loved ones. The homeowners and guests would sit around a table joining hands or touching their pinkies, and would call out to spirits asking them to move an object on the table or making their presence known through noises. Table turning or table tipping was also a method of spirit communication popularised in the Victorian period. This method was similar to the seance mentioned previously, but with the intention of being able to tip or turn a table that the participants were lightly touching with their fingers. And this is a method that's actually still used today, despite various explanations as to how the movement could be a product of the subconscious mind. It's also a very easy method to fake spirit communication, as there is plausible deniability with so many people touching the table, and once the table starts moving, it's easier to keep it moving with its own momentum. Spirit photography was also created by accident during the Victorian period, when photographer William Mumler took a self-portrait. Upon looking at the photo, Mumler's deceased cousin appeared in the picture behind him. Startled, Mumler thought he had actually captured a picture of a ghost. It was quickly realised that the image was actually a result of a double exposure using a photography plate that he had used before, and in this case the photography plate contained a picture of his cousin who had passed away 12 years earlier. Rather than come clean, Mumler actually started to advertise himself as a spirit photographer, and local newspapers quickly grabbed hold of this and ran with it as if it was a legitimate means of spirit communication. This was around the time of the American Civil War, and as you can probably imagine, business was absolutely booming. Mumler even managed to photograph Mary Todd Lincoln, the wife of Abraham, through his spirit photography endeavours. Mumler was later exposed as a fraud when people recognised that some of the supposed spirits in his photographs were actually still living people. He was actually tried of fraud, and interestingly, P.T. Barnum was one of the main people to testify against him. Ultimately though, Mumler was acquitted because the prosecution couldn't prove beyond all doubt that he was fabricating the photographs. But if you were to take a look at these photographs, you'll quickly realise that they're definitely fakes and not pictures of spirits. Sticking with the fakery of the Victorian paranormal era, the Fox sisters were, you guessed it, a group of 3 sisters who would travel around the USA performing seances and mediumship. They were some of the key people in the birth of the spiritualist movement, and were well known for consistently getting responses via knocking during their seances. The Fox sisters actually made a successful career hosting seances for many years, until in 1888 when the eldest sister revealed that it had all been a hoax and the knocking noises were actually the product of the sisters' ability to click their toe joints. And clicking their toe joints would make a knock or a popping sound that they could control the volume of. Margaret, the eldest sister who revealed the hoax, even went as far as demonstrating how she could pop her joints to make the noise in front of a crowd. The Fox sisters' reputation was in ruins due to this revelation, and despite Margaret later trying to retract her confession, the damage had already been done, and the sisters suffered financially due to being known as fakes. This, however, didn't stop the meteoric rise of the spiritualist movement, and new methods of spirit communication were constantly being invented. One of these methods was the Ouija board, and while I won't go into the origins of the Ouija board as it's been done to death on YouTube recently, the board was a way to try and streamline seances, so rather than verbally go through the alphabet every time to gather letters and try and spell out answers. Again, the ideomotor effect could be the cause of the planchette moving, or it could be people's subconscious minds doing it, or, as with anything, outright fakery, as with multiple people on the board, again, there is plausible deniability. There is also an element of the questions being asked that people on the board either already know the answers to or will be able to guess where the board is going before it has fully answered. A personal story around this comes from when we investigated Bolsover Castle. A number of people were using a Ouija board and asked for a name. The board started to spell out D and then U before someone shouted out, "Dudley, is your name Dudley?" And of course after this the planchette went directly to yes. Later in the session, questions such as when were you born and when did you die were asked. And after both of the years were given, how old were you was obviously the next question. The same guest that had shouted out Dudley previously did some quick maths and basically said something along the lines of 30, okay. Clearly having already worked it out and verbalised it, the planchette went to 38. Again, this could lead to the subconscious helping move the planchette, especially as those seeds are being planted during the session. In summary, the Victorian period was when the paranormal field and spiritualism exploded. Unfortunately, it was also filled with fakery and untrustworthy practical methods that are still being used today and have somehow determined the trajectory of the paranormal. Chapter 2: The Paranormal Media. One of the first paranormal celebrities was Harry Price, and if you've watched my Bawley Rectory video, you will already be familiar with Harry. Harry Price is seen both as sort of a hero and villain, as in a lot of cases he would go out of his way to try and prove fakery and expose those lying about their paranormal activity. Harry particularly went out of his way to try and expose mediums, which some people really liked and others loathed. This is probably due to the fact that you're questioning or criticising something that is based on people's beliefs, and generally speaking people don't like that being challenged. Harry Price would actually be caught up in his own scandal after his death, where various people would come forward and accuse him of fakery during his Bawley Rectory investigation. Fast forward a number of years to the late 90s or early 2000s and the meteoric rise of paranormal TV shows such as Most Haunted, Ghost Adventures and Ghost Hunters. And while I outlined the lasting impact of Most Haunted in a previous video, all three of these shows, as well as many others, were most certainly fake and a huge exaggeration of what paranormal investigations actually are. Once again, some of these TV shows relied on practical methods, which, when coupled with a TV production that have access to researchers, or they're more than willing to just make up the history about a location, they're guaranteed to get hits on these practical methods. Some of the other TV shows started relying on ghost hunting gadgets, and while I'm a fan of the various devices, these should always be used to try and triangulate evidence and support other activity that you are experiencing. These TV shows had a tendency to take things like EMF spikes and terrible quality audio recordings as gospel and proof of ghosts, even to the point of overlaying random words over static in hope that you will hear the words they believed they captured. This is one of the problems with a lot of paranormal equipment and, I guess by extension, paranormal investigators. It's deliberately quite ambiguous and left up to interpretation, so it can be hard to argue what constitutes the paranormal activity and what is something far more normal. Unfortunately, the outright faking and overreacting seems to have entered the wider human psyche, and various people now believe that this is how you should act when you're investigating. Various YouTube channels dedicated to ghost hunting are using the same old tricks, the same format as Most Haunted and Ghost Adventures, and overreacting massively to mundane things like ghost tubes spitting out the D word. Now, don't get me wrong, fear can appear in many different forms. And interestingly, when myself and my partner experienced what we believe to be genuine paranormal activity, we didn't take the fight or flight option, rather froze and just looked at each other confused in disbelief.
Especially making that noise, can you do it again please?
That was so loud. That was so loud, that's something. Sense off.
And while I can totally appreciate that some people's reactions to fear is to scream, shout or jump around, this happens far too often with the vast majority of YouTube ghost hunters, often over things like a REM pod going off, which can be settled very easily with a walkie-talkie, or the aforementioned phone apps presenting a semi-relevant word. It just reeks of bullshit and gives people the wrong impression of what paranormal investigations are actually like. It also makes a mockery of the people who genuinely believe in the paranormal, when all they keep seeing is that there are violent hauntings and the D word everywhere. Chapter 3: Paranormal Drama. To reiterate the statement that I opened this video with, the paranormal can be a very confusing place. As with anything that is belief-based, a lot of what people consider paranormal is entirely up to their own interpretation. And while science can go some ways to explaining things that are part of the natural human psyche, there are still a lot of unexplored areas that I feel deserve a deeper look than a simple ghosts don't exist. Unfortunately, parapsychology, or the study of ghosts, is seriously underfunded and seen as a kind of a joke in the science world. And I can't help but feel that this is compounded by the varied and sometimes out there beliefs on what could be a ghost or a haunting. Sadly, the paranormal doesn't do itself any favours and seems hell-bent on cannibalising itself in some instances. Go on to any paranormal discussion group on Facebook and you will see all manner of people claiming that dust particles are their deceased relatives or that Henry VII haunts their bathroom. And when challenged on this or asked for it to be proven, it is often met with hostility and claims of toxicity or being a troll. Again, belief is paramount in the paranormal, and as everything is hypothetical and no one can really say what a genuine haunting is or proof of a ghost. A real life example of this is the belief that Ouija boards need to either be opened or closed properly, as well as needing to be blessed before use. Which leads me to ask that who's actually qualified to bless these boards, and where did this idea originate from, as it wasn't something that happened for decades of their use and many people used them without worry. Some of the closest examples of genuine paranormal activity almost always seem to have some level of fuckery go along with them, like the aforementioned Fox sisters or the Enfield haunting, which, while some of the activity may seem genuine, the girls who experience it openly admitted to faking things, which immediately loses it a lot of credibility and makes it hard to believe anything that was going on, as they've admitted to faking certain bits of it. Within the last year, YouTube channels based around debunking paranormal activity and paranormal channels have grown massively. And while I agree that this is a good thing and audiences should be educated on what paranormal investigations are actually like, the emergence of these channels seems to have brought a tidal wave of drama along with them. This came to a head with the recent Cody and Satori fiasco that has gone on far too long and caused a humongous rift in the paranormal scene. For anyone who doesn't know, Cody and Satori are hosts at the Conjuring House in the USA, and they were recently caught out using the same toe or joint popping method that the Fox sisters used over 100 years ago. The debunkers had a field day with this and were like a dog with a bone, making video after video exposing the technique and implicating the channels that had featured Cody and Satori. Debunkers don't even seem to be safe from other debunkers, with one in particular getting called out for supporting fake channels, and another who were in deep with the debunking community claiming it's full of toxic personalities. I totally agree in principle that fans of the paranormal should be educated as to what is real and what is fake. However, drama seems to follow debunking channels wherever they go. On top of this, the wider perception of the YouTube community is that the real paranormal genre is boring, which it very much can be. For anyone who doesn't know, I am a paranormal investigator in the real paranormal sphere, and I've lost count of how many nights I've spent in cold buildings talking to thin air and getting absolutely no response. But saying that, I'm also a firm believer that to believe in the paranormal, you have to have had a first-hand experience. And unless you are on an investigation, and at the moment it's absolutely impossible to know the full context of the situation or what activity is being captured. This goes doubly for watching YouTube videos. While a lot of stuff can be faked, again, if you're not there, you don't know what mindset people are in, and you don't know the full context and the circumstances of that situation. Chapter 4: Glimmers of Hope. For all of the bad points that create problems in the paranormal and make it less credible, there are actually some glimmers of hope, and the landscape of the paranormal seems to be slowly changing. Danny Moss, a paranormal investigator from the north of England who has some very strong opinions, is leading the charge with his methods of investigation and ideas. His involvement with the My Haunted Hotel project is a fresh take on investigating, and is the longest running continuous paranormal investigation to date. And while I totally agree with him when he speaks out against paranormal investigations that only last a number of hours, it's actually quite unrealistic for a lot of paranormal investigators to be able to conduct a full-term investigation with full surveillance over such a long period of time. Interestingly, Danny and the My Haunted Hotel project have also felt the cruel swing of the debunker's scythe, leading him to put distance between himself and the debunkers who he had previously welcomed with open arms. Other than the My Haunted Hotel project, the Ouija brothers deserve a massive shout out and congratulations as the first real paranormal YouTube channel to reach 100,000 subscribers. They are the undisputed kings of the genre, and while investigating can be quiet, they more than make up for it with their likeable and relatable personalities. Their integrity has never been called into question, and in the 7 odd years that they've been investigating on YouTube, they've caught maybe 3 or 4 things that they could consider to be generally paranormal. Unfortunately, and this may just be a gut reaction to more eyes being on them, they are also getting accusations of being fake, which is most definitely not the case. The final flag bearers for a more mature and serious look at the paranormal are the BBC. And while this may seem shocking, the BBC have commissioned a couple of very well made, non-sensationalist podcast and TV programmes around the subject of ghosts. These are the Uncanny podcast, where Danny Robbins takes a look at various paranormal cases with a hefty dose of skepticism and tries to rely on supporting accounts from other eyewitnesses. The other BBC offering was a TV programme called The Girl, the Ghost, the Gravestone, in which BBC radio presenter Sian Elry investigates a famous poltergeist haunting set in Wales, and again does a very thorough job going through the archives and tracking down those who experienced the haunting firsthand. Both of these pieces of media are fantastic, and they take a much more measured look at the paranormal without the reliance on practical methods from the Victorian period or overreacting to a phone app saying Mary. For me, this is a great and refreshing take on the paranormal and gives me hope for the future as an investigator and a commentator on the paranormal. Hopefully the wider audience starts to see it this way too, and genuine paranormal isn't seen as something that's boring, but an actual study into an incredibly rare phenomenon. Anyway, that's this video done. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Watch this video next about some more fakers in Ed and Lorraine Warren. Bye. He was actually tried a Ford?